Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. Today I wanted to do a bit of a mid-year check-in with my reading goals for 2021. Today I wanted to sort of touch base on how they're going, talk a little bit about the progress and some of the changes I would like to make for them going forward, going into the second half of the year. So the first goal I had for this year is the Invisible Cities reading project that I am a co-host of, and I'm sure you've heard me talk about it before, but it is basically a reading project that I'm doing with a group of people where we choose a number of countries each month that we read books from. So the idea of it, the sort of what got us started with it was wanting to have a project that promoted more reading of translated literature, and it is the main focus of the project, although some of the countries that we explore don't have translated literature available in English or in other languages. A general sense of cultural exploration and cultural immersion, that is really the main point of the project. We started the year off with having 3 countries per month, and one of the things that we have changed is that starting from August we'll be doing 2 countries per month for the foreseeable future. So in terms of my Invisible Cities reading goal, I started the year off very strong and reading several books from the few countries that I selected to focus on, and then I've been progressively getting worse in actually getting to the books that I didn't plan to read. So for my Peru book for April, I finished in June, and my North Korea book for May I still haven't finished, and I haven't even started on anything for June or July, so clearly I'm lagging behind. And I think one of the reasons is that I didn't have books for the countries that we had selected in June and July, and I had other reading projects in May, specifically the Springathon, that sort of shifted my focus. One of the problems I've come across is the delay between the beginning of the month and me actually having access to one of the books that I could read for Invisible Cities. So one of the things I'm keeping in mind is to try to have at least one book on my shelves, preferably, or borrowing from the library, that I can start with immediately as the month begins. The shift to only 2 countries is great for me because I think that will allow me to actually read at least one book from each country we have going forward, which is definitely my goal. I still want to catch up with the countries that I haven't read from, especially because I've been buying some books from a few of the countries that we've already had as our monthly choices, and I definitely want to catch up with those over the course of the rest of the year, and we'll be talking about them as they come up. And but I do feel like Invisible Cities has been a fantastic experience for me so far, in the sense of the Discord community is fantastic to follow. I usually don't write a lot in it, but I love reading all of the posts that appear there. And it has become a sort of thing that inspires me to read more translated literature in general, and to look for more publishers that publish translated literature, to be more aware of the kind of books that are being translated, and so to see patterns, and to be also a way to discover new books through reviews or other people's posts for Invisible Cities, or from my own research in a sort of preparation for Invisible Cities announcement videos that I do each month. I always prepare some of the titles I could choose for each of the countries. So I find that while my reading has been slowing down, I've still found a lot that I've gained from having this project ongoing. But I would like in the second half of the year to try to read at least one book for each country, to catch up with some of the countries that we've already had in the first half of the year and I haven't gotten to yet. Also to watch more movies and cook more food from the countries, as well as listening to music. That is something I did a lot in the first few months. But I think that leads me into one of my additional, or one of my changes for this goal, and that is I would really like to start doing vlogs for Invisible Cities. I think just having like themed vlogs for Invisible Cities each month might be a sort of the reminder I need to do more Invisible Cities stuff aside from the reading throughout the month, because that was something I really enjoyed in the first season of the year. The second goal I had was to decrease my TBR/buy less books. So this has been an interesting one, and if you have seen my, I've done two quarterly check-ins with my TBR. I've called them TBR updates/book hauls, where basically I talk about the number of books that I've read from my shelves, from my physical TBR, the number of books I've added, so my book haul, and sort of the overall status of the TBR. And at this point it has actually decreased. I have been reading from my own shelves, and I have unhauled some of the books because I go through my shelves regularly, but usually I try to have at least once a year that I go through them more closely, and that is something I've been doing in the beginning of the summer. I did sort of a close look through, specifically to look for books that don't reflect my current interests in books, and I've talked about that in my most recent quarterly check-in. Most of what I'm drawn to now is either translated literature or nonfiction, or the overlap between those two things, but that has been where my mind is at when I'm looking at reviews and the kind of books that I pay attention to. When I've read books from my shelves, those are the kinds of books that I'm most likely to keep on my shelves after I've read them, which means something, of course. It means that they are worth the money spent to own. The decreasing of my TBR is happening. The buying less books is more questionable. It is definitely less than last year, but not by a large margin, I would say, because last year I had already decreased from the previous year a lot. So I think I bought less than half of what I bought in 2019. Trying to reflect on how my book buying best goes hand in hand with my other reading goals. The thing that I've landed on as my guideline for book buying in the next half of the year is, or the second half of the year, is to have a reading plan, to have a plan in mind for reading the book I buy in the near future. So that may sound vague, but basically if I have a project in mind for the book, then that is a likelihood that I read that book fairly soon. So that could be in terms of Invisible Cities reading, or readathons, or even buddy reads. When I have a specific plan to read a book with someone else or for a particular purpose, then that is fairly likely to happen. If it is a book that for some other reason I think I will want to read immediately, then that is also a good reason to get it. To buy from indie publishers is something that I've had a lot in my mind, especially because there's a lot of indie publishers that do translated literature, and I really want to support a vision of inclusivity and sort of a global view on books and literature. And publishers who do their best in promoting more translated literature and more cultural awareness is something I really want to support as sort of a part of the industry. And so that is something that I have tried to keep in mind, and there are a few publishers that I really want to try, so to see if they are for me, and therefore afterwards sort of keep supporting them. That is how I've approached Fitzgeraldo. Sorry about the changing of sunlight in the background. There is sun going through the leaves, and that might end up looking weird on the video. How much I buy is something that is sort of already in a good direction. I think my focus point at the moment is what I buy, and to be more mindful with what is added to my shelves, not just how much is added. So that leads me on to the third goal I had. At the beginning of the year, I said the third goal is follow the path, which is basically my own term for going down rabbit holes, or to create webs of or networks of the reading that you do. So it's basically, for me, it could either mean going down rabbit holes in the sense of you find a topic you're interested in, just a deep dive into one particular thing or subject or time period, author. Another way of following the path is to sort of create a web or a network of books. So it could be jumping from one book to another based on one book referencing another book and reading that book, and then that book referencing another book, or to read a nonfiction book, for example, about one topic and it's sort of linked to another topic. So it just creates this network of knowledge and information that becomes easier to hold on to, because you're not just having these islands of information, they become part of a larger whole, a context. And I think for me, with both types of reading, it's basically just reading deeply. I remember what I read better, and it also usually ends up being the most important reading for me. Escapism reading, it has a lot of value to it, especially in times when like the pandemic, that can feel so isolating because of the nature of the pandemic. It can feel unsettling and worrying and just all of those emotions. And I think reading for connection or reading for comfort is something that has a lot of value in it. But for me, the thing that makes me want to read and want to read more is the things that inspire thought. The books that makes me want to write in them, the books that makes me kind of pause to look things up, or to have to think about something before I continue reading it, to want to read other things on the same topic, to continue to think about the book long afterwards, to want to reread it, to want to dissect it. Basically all those things is the thing that draws me to read. The thing that usually is behind it is the reading deeply. My reading tastes are quite wide, but also my interests in general are many, and I think that can sometimes make my reading very eclectic, which isn't something I think is a bad thing. But it does mean that you never go deep into any one thing. And I think one of the things related to the eclectic thing is that sometimes it isn't even just that I have a lot of interests, it is that I don't have patience. I have a lot of patience in general, but when it comes to reading, I always want to have all of the things immediately, and that is also definitely behind the fact that I often read a lot of books at the same time, because I can't wait until I finish one book to start a new one. So that is also something I've been actively trying to work against I would say since May. Since the end of May, I've been trying to check off some of the books that I have had currently reading. I feel like I'm in the process of figuring out where my balance is. All that to say that the third goal I had for this year was to follow the path / reading deeply, all that stuff. And I have done that in periods, and it has turned out again to be very enjoyable. So I think one example was in January when I read for books for Japan for Invisible Cities, which was fantastic. I have once again been reading a lot of nature writing this year, so because we did the springathon in May, I started to read nature stuff sort of in preparation for the springathon in April. In the end, I have been reading nature writing very actively since April, and it hasn't really stopped. And I think I am known for reading a lot of nature writing, so that isn't something new, but I don't think I've read so much in such a short amount of time for a while, and it has been a fantastic experience for me because, like I said previously, you start to connect the dots. You start to see patterns in the kind of things that come up in topics that is more, I wouldn't say trending, but more sort of more talked about in a particular time period. Like, for example, with the most recent books I read that are also just recently published, the idea of rewilding was very prominent, whereas with a lot of the older nature writing that I've read, it isn't at all something that comes up. The more I read concentratedly, the stronger of an effect it has on how I view the world outside of reading, and that is something I really appreciate. I think especially the overlap between reading and life is something that I think is often, when you think about those important books for you, that is usually what you think about. Books that in some way changes your worldviews or changes your life, which is basically the same thing in my book. And reading deeply or reading more thoughtfully in a particular thing, on a particular thing or topic or whatever, is for me a very likely end result is how it changes my worldviews. One of the things I really want to do in the second half of 2021 is to read more books from the same author. So it's one of those things that I started thinking about it last year, at the end of last year, because there was this top 9 authors you read in 2020 thing going on Instagram, which basically you listed the 9 authors that you'd read the most books from in that year. And I realized that that list for me would be very short, because most of the books I'd read in the year were not from the same author. They were all individual authors that the majority definitely were new to me, so I hadn't read them before 2020. So that is something I really want to change, because when I find an author that I like, when I find there's something about their writing that I like, and usually it is hard for me to even describe why I like it, that is also, again, a recipe for my most enjoyable reading. And I don't know why it isn't something I've been prioritizing more. So I did something in this vibe a couple of years ago when I read J.D. Salinger's entire bibliography in 1 month, which was a fantastic reading experience. In the last few years, that is sort of stands out to me as something very special. Basically, I guess that is what I am making a reading goal. That is how it relates to the buying goal, in the sense that maybe I've read 1 or 2 books by an author and really enjoyed something about the writing, and I want to prioritize buying more books from the same author, so that I don't just think I will read more of them in the future, but actually make that happen by having more of their books on my shelves. And in particular, for the rest of this year, I am hoping to make this happen in sort of a closer proximity. Hopefully, by the end of the year, I will actually be able to do the top 9 authors I've read this year, with a few authors that I've read more than 1 book in 2021. And I hope that will reflect some new favorites. So that is sort of how I'm approaching this follow the path thing, that I want to read more from particular writers' bibliography. So that's the 3 goals I had for 2021. This was a very chatty video, very long-winded. I guess I just wanted to sort of chat about them and my thought process as well. That has been ongoing for a few weeks. I feel like it's still something of a work in progress with how I think about these things and how my goals fit into my reading life. So that was really all I wanted to say about my mid-year check-in with my goals for 2021. I would love to know if you made any goals for this year and how they're going so far. If you made any adjustments or if you've come up with any new goals like I have, I would also love to hear about that in the comments below. I hope you're doing well and you're taking care of yourselves, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.